Hello and welcome back to the channel. So good of you to join me. Before you get excited, I am absolutely nowhere interesting. In fact, I'm at my storage unit right now, grabbing some stuff to prep for the baby that's on its way. But that's okay, because in this video, we're going to be talking about a topic that I've been meaning to discuss with you since early on this year. And that all has to do with this camera right here. A while back, I talked about switching from the APS-C Fuji X-H2 to a full-frame Sony, but not long after that, I switched over to the Sony A7R Mark IV from the Sony A7 IV. And there are several reasons, 8 to be exact, why I decided to make this switch. Probably the biggest reason why I decided to stick with Sony over any other option was simply for the fact that my wife and I have already invested quite a bit of money into the Sony system. We're talking batteries, flashes, chargers, memory cards. We put a lot into this system, and it feels kind of foolish to switch when pretty much all cameras at this level are pretty much the same. Now, if I had not already had quite a bit invested into this Sony system, I might have picked something else, but, you know, that's not what we're talking about. Reason number 2 should be obvious, and that is the increased resolution of this camera. And I know people always talk about how, 60 megapixels is just too much for any camera, but I like to crop to different aspect ratios, specifically panoramic aspect ratios, and I don't like doing the panoramic traditional way. I like just taking one photo and cropping off the tops and the bottoms. And for that, you need lots of resolution so that you don't lose a ton of resolution. I'm usually cutting the resolution by at least a half when I crop to a panoramic. So 60 megapixels means I'm getting at least 26 to 27 when I crop to the 1:3, which is super cool. Means I can still use it as a good photo for printing in future. So the croppability of this sensor is phenomenal. Reason number 3 are the features of the camera itself. So we're talking a weather-sealed camera, one of the best articulating screens I've ever used, high-resolution EVF, and there are so many buttons on this camera, and pretty much all of them can be customized to do almost anything, and that makes it so versatile and easy to control externally, so I don't have to keep digging into the menu to find stuff. There's just lots of features that are built into this camera that make it really usable and really easy to work with. That way I can just kind of focus on the creativity and less on the machine. Reason number 4, Sony has a ton of lens options. And coming from a Fuji GFX was my last big camera, it just didn't have very many lens options. And I like, the different zooms, primes, different budgets, different sizes. Sony just really puts a lot into their different lenses, and this 24-70, it's probably one of the best lenses I've ever used. Reason number 5 is processing power. I did extensive testing, making the decision to switch between the A7 IV and switching over to the A7R5. And what I found was this was as good, if not better, at processing images, especially at high speeds, as you're autofocusing. Just like the processing power of this camera is pretty amazing. I'm very impressed by it, especially at such high resolutions. It really it handles it so well. Number 6, I found that these photos that are coming out of here are so easy to edit. Sony really did a good job getting the color, the dynamic range, the balance right on this camera. So pretty much any photo I take, I find it very easy to work with not a lot of loss of detail if I have to boost shadows or cut highlights and things like that. So very happy with the editability, at least for my styles of edits out of this camera. Number 7, I'm always thinking about the future and what my goals are, because my goal is to do a lot of printing in the future. I feel like this camera lends itself really well to someone who is interested in printing large. Having those higher resolutions means that as time goes on, as I get more into it and I get better at photography, I'll be more confident that I'm getting photos that I could print at very high resolutions, very large. So I like thinking more about the future of where I want my photography to go. And the last reason I've written down is Sony is always innovating, and they have a really good ecosystem for that. I know there's some complaints about firmware updates and things like that, but overall I've been really happy with how much Sony wants to innovate their cameras. So especially with the newest A9 Mark III that has a global shutter. No one's done that yet. The A1 that shoots 50 megapixel stack sensor. Really what it comes down to with technology especially is the company that has the highest budget usually winds up with the greatest innovation. And Sony, because they're so spread out between their video game systems and their production company, TVs, speakers, they just have a lot going for them. So they have a lot of budget that they can put into upping their camera technology. And because it's such a popular, photography is such a popular hobby, I feel like Sony is going to continue to innovate and innovate. So those are just the reasons that I decided to switch over to the Sony A7RV. I've been very happy with it so far. I would say that I'm still in kind of the first impressions phase, even though I've taken a good 800 or so photos out of this camera. I feel like until you get over the thousands, 1,500, 2,000, you really don't know much. So as far as the first impressions go, I'm very happy with it. There are obviously some negatives. The lenses, because their full frame lenses are a bit heavy, so hanging this around my neck gets a little bit cumbersome. I'm not a huge fan of the lack of a grip there. I've got larger hands, so sometimes if I'm holding heavy stuff, I wind up being a little bit squished in there. It's not terrible. I'm not a huge fan of this top multi-interface port. I feel like it needs to have better weather sealing there, since that's a point of failure that I've seen several photographers discussing. So, but other than that, couldn't be happier. So what camera do you shoot with? What do you like about it? What do you dislike about it? Love to know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for joining me, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Take care.